professionally, I taught 45 years, so several different places.
Okay, what level?
Well, I started out in grade school, and the last 7 years I was dean of women in high school.
Oh, okay, okay.
And then I retired in 2012.
Oh, it's already starting.
So I teach classes.
Okay, okay. I went and saw Liz's office. Did you see it?
Yeah.
Do you see
Yeah,
the
so I hope everybody
ports in the
enjoys it.
bathroom?
They will.
Where they, you know how they have the brick? Well, every so often.
No,
they have
because
an
this
empty
is
spot, and they
so
got
I
a wall in there.
actually
You
had
know what?
3 people
Plant.
in that.
Oh.
Well, I've never been to that one.
I've been in the one downstairs.
And there are a number of people here in the
Okay, yeah.
that have ancestors.
I mean, you can buy those.
So, yeah, they don't need time, St. Louis, or your family has been here a long time.
And not necessarily.
Most everything needs
In
money.
St. Louis, and then we moved out.
Okay.
And then I didn't move back to St. Louis until I was 7.
Oh, okay.
Because we moved out to the mall.
You've
Or
been
you
doing
wanted
it
to do that.
Yeah,
Oh, there's
I
that.
think- and then I seriously can't stick around and run the PowerPoint.
I will be that person.
Yeah, and so the preview is there, she has some slides that have the slides themselves have transitions on them, so just, you can see it.
Okay.
You have to go up.
Sandy?
Which ear do you want it behind?
All good things. Oh, you're welcome. Nice to meet you. Hi, Holly. How's everybody doing?
Okay. We have a new person.
Hi.
Her name is Sharon and this is Holly. She's our leader in the leader of chair exercise on Tuesday.
I got the biggest smile.
Yeah. Well, she tells us what to do and where to be. Somebody's got
I'm
it.
not the instructor.
And to follow on the stream. And I don't know,
Lunch.
being the pastor here, I will project to be very loud.
You're gonna see an article about the years there.
Okay, that's
It
fine.
does, it does.
I didn't get it.
Let's test your levels.
Liz, in the SAJE booklet, I think it was last quarter. That's true story.
All right, testing. Is that loud enough? Too loud?
No, that's
perfect.
That's gonna be perfect for this crowd.
Okay.
Anyway, they have some stories.
For this crowd, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, no, I blow out the room on a normal basis, so.
There was a
So
couple
what I'm
that
going to
met
show you,
during the SAJE.
you can turn yourself on and off.
Right.
Okay.
I don't know who it is, but she asked for stories.
Back.
Mm-hmm.
So I submitted the story.
Okay, but it's gonna be in this upcoming, and we're gonna go
Not
through
like
that.
because we don't have anybody running this
How
out.
are you?
It'll just.
Amazing.
And then you put this at night.
Good.
How many did we send out?
Yeah.
That used to be.
Jan and George went back down.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he brought me in that way.
Okay.
Showed me the elevator.
Okay.
Came up with me, yeah.
Super.
Yeah.
Well, they get these,
Well, this is gonna be a great presentation.
they get these
Oh, I'm
newsletters and
looking
then
forward to it.
they'll ask me, well, I want to say, read your newsletter, it's in there.
I
But
had
they don't look really
great,
good.
great,
Just mention. But
great,
it's
great.
okay.
Well, you know, it used to be that they would advertise
Cemetery,
in the-
we're in the revolution.
Okay,
that
okay.
everybody got.
And you're so down.
You know, one of the things,
I feel sad.
I know, so a lot of people
I
don't
knew
know.
that you were connected.
Yeah.
That's where I have.
That's how I heard about it.
I walked in one day and they welcomed me.
Okay.
And I've been here ever since.
Do I need to take notes?
That's up to you.
Oh, hopefully I can just enjoy it.
Yeah, just.
Yes.
So, I mean, it's not bad. I didn't so I think it told me I was going
I wasn't driving by, I heard her say something about notes.
like I said, I
If anybody would like a copy of this, I will be happy to send.
Okay, okay.
Good.
Here you go. Okay. And this is somebody else. Okay, that's who I thought it was.
Oh.
Okay, so what you can do is just send them to me and then I will print out, the slides and then you can get up to
Today,
yourself.
normally I don't wear garters. It's totally
tried out because I didn't know.
Ah, it would have been.
Well, I can send the long term.
Okay, send the long version. Yes. Yes.
I got circles.
Appreciate it.
So you could send it.
Do this often?
This is about the 10th time. But it's been over a period of 2.
So is this your normal
Yeah,
area?
well, yeah, I'm sure you don't do it every day.
No,
Yeah.
maybe not normal.
Is anybody normal?
Yes.
What's normal with that?
I am very much so.
There's 2 more.
Is Jeremy? Honestly, the reason I'm moving.
Really?
Yes.
What's our
I need
plan?
2 whole ladies here.
It's the involvement
One of my places, I didn't think it.
So do you belong to the KO?
Since 1991,
Because I don't
I belong to
put
my
St. Louis together with
John Sepulveda.
We were in United States.
Actually, it took me a while. I started on South Mountain, Jedediah Southern Missouri, Ocala, they had charter members.
Yeah, I mean,
And the charter member,
That's right, that's right.
and then for something coming up here.
for the revolution.
They had their own revolution.
Yes.
And that's what they call my children. Well, you aren't home by yourself. Hello.
Or somebody behind you.
That's what our kids tell us, you know. And so I thought,
Sharon,
I'm just gonna move on.
like the charming way of remembering my name.
5 years this December, then I'll move here. You know.
You don't like Rose?
Been after.
At one point they were gonna name me Church and Christ, because I was born in Miami.
Oh, I could,
Oh, yeah. I didn't want to be there. I had no choice.
Really, what they call you?
several money gentlemen in church. Okay. No.
There's another person.
Yeah, that's Yvonne.
Yvonne.
Yvonne, this is Sharon.
April.
Yvonne. Well, you shrugged. Is that correct? Is your name Yvonne? Okay.
And then I just did Constitution Week. And so now we're gonna.
You've got a lot of names, sir. I've only got one.
But how that's for now, ask her in and out.
What's your name? Sharon.
Yeah.
And the reason I remember her name was Marmalade.
They all go back.
That was her that started that.
We all,
I like your name. That was Audrey Hepburn breakfast at Tiffany's.
oh, no, well,
That's what somebody said that in front of our priest. And this is I'm telling you. I don't know, some lady, I don't remember, oh, I think it was Darlene. And our
maybe May and Wes just went together.
she embarrassed me. Something awful. The one that was always around me. Oh, no, you know what? She was before my time.
Oh, yeah. I have to do could afford it. She acted like it. I mean,
The women used to kind of get along. Ask them what's going to be going on. You didn't have to see it. You know what was going to be. Now it's just unbelievable. 5 minutes of the movie, they're jumping in. Disgusting. I don't even watch it. Oh, Darcy. She always thinks.
But this arm is still on, and sore. Oh, not sore.
Yes, I've done this.
Then I didn't have any trouble at all, but 2 weeks later, I could feel the same.
I can still feel the warmth.
Yeah, then you gotta redo it,
That's right.
75.
Why did he say that? Why did you get your pneumonia?
No, I just, I forgot to say that.
Hello, hello, hello. We are going to get started here. Couple of announcements. Next Thursday, which is October 23rd, is our movie, which is the 688. It's a drama about World War II. True story. I have seen this twice. It is so good. I'm willing to see it a third time.
What's the name of it?
It's called The 6888, and it's a drama during World War II. The only U.S. Army's Corps unit of color, stationed overseas, takes on an impossible mission to sort and distribute an enormous backlog of undelivered mail, a task that significantly boosted the morale of American troops.
That's in your
Yes, it's a great story, and that is at 1 o'clock here. We have popcorn, lemonade, and water. So if you're interested, you can call me. You don't have to, or just show up. And then on October 30th is bingo at Church of the Advent. And following the bingo, they are going to have a presentation on how to avoid scary scammers. So everybody is welcome to that. Our speaker today is from the St. Louis Genealogical Society, Judy Belford. She has been an educator for over 45 years and is going to talk about the Revolutionary War attack on St. Louis, which I didn't even realize happened here. So I guess I had some blanks in my history education. So Judy is going to have to leave a little bit early, so what we're going to do is if you have questions, ask them as we go along. So let's give Judy a great big hand.
Thank you. It's really exciting to be here and share this story with you. It's one of the favorite presentations that I make. I actually became interested in it, I don't know how many years ago, because I found out that 3 of my ancestors were involved in this battle. So I think you'll enjoy the story. I hope you will. Sometimes we hear about the Battle of Fort San Carlos. And you think, well, that's got nothing to do with St. Louis. Well, you will find out that it does. Okay, so Liz, when you're ready. All right, so we need to set the stage to find out why this came about. And so you've heard from your history books about Marquette and Joliet, how they explored the Mississippi River in 1673. So a good 100 years before the American Revolution. All right, and then, what was that, 10 years later, 20 years later, missionaries and trappers, they kind of always went together. They came down and they started establishing settlements. And the first settlement was at Cahokia. That's that north circle. All right. The next settlement then was Kaskaskia, and that's the next circle you'll see coming up. Okay. And there is still things in Kaskaskia, so you can still visit there. Then after that, it was in 1718, Fort Deschartres, so that's across the river. They always have a big rendezvous, usually the first week in June. It's a very active tourist site, history site. So you see Fort Deschartres there. And then finally, the next settlement, oh no, that was it. We said that the Illinois Territory was really considered part of Canada. And so the reason we have so much information about these people is that they were French, so they were predominantly Catholic, and Catholic church records are phenomenal, okay? Then, about 1735, the people from Illinois started coming across the river simply because of land and mines, and they started the village of St. Genevieve, which is, 60 miles south of St. Louis. So this is how we set the stage. Next, please. Then in 1754, the French and the English went to war over colonial land and colonial wealth. We call it the French and Indian War, and in Europe it's called the 7 Years' War. Well, the war wasn't going very well for France, and so King Louis XV secretly deeded the, next one please. Nope, go back one, can you? That's okay if you can't. Okay. All of the territory west of the Mississippi to his Spanish cousin, King Charles III. So St. Genevieve, and where we now stand, became Spanish, but it was only populated by French people. Okay, and there is a map of the French and Indian War really took part in the northeast of the United States, but it still affected us here. Next, please. So in 1763, the Treaty of Paris ended that war. Great Britain won. And Great Britain then got all of the land east of the Mississippi. But you know, the French and the English didn't get along. They had a very bitter rivalry. Part of the differences not only was in religion, faith, practices, it was also in law. And French law was very, very different than English law, especially where women are concerned. But also French had a different way of dividing up land for cultivation than the English did. So New Orleans stayed French. Everything else became British. The French people in Chartres and in Kaskaskia and Cahokia started bailing out and coming over to this side of the river because they wanted to get away from the English. Next, please. So in February of 1764, Auguste Chouteau brought 30 craftsmen to set up a new village on the west side. And they wanted a place that had easy access for trading. It was mostly supposed to be a trading center. And the best place they found was 18 miles south of the confluence of the Missouri and the Mississippi. And they established the village here. And it was going to be the village of St. Louis, dedicated to the French king, Louis IX. And you will see next slide. These are the 30 people that were the first settlers here. And actually, in the first list, halfway down, is Gabriel Dodier, who was one of my first ancestors. But they all, like any other small village, their children intermarried a lot. Now, at St. Louis Genealogical Society, we have a program called First Families. And if you can establish your line back to first families, the first people to settle here, you could join and get a little pin. So about 5 of those earliest settlers still have descendants in St. Louis. Okay, next slide. In 1774, Pernas, who was the governor, Spanish governor then, of this area, he reported back to Spain the amounts of grain and the harvest levels that the settlers, habitant is the term for a farmer, how much grain they harvested. And it's amazing because in that year, they sent 272 tons of grain to New Orleans. Think about that. There was no machinery. We are cultivating by hand. That's an amazing amount. Okay. So they also, next paragraph, he also sent a list back of the furs and skins that were harvested. This was the wealth that Europe was looking for. St. Louis actually became the breadbasket for New Orleans. Okay? And all of these things were shipped in, it says pirogues and bateaux. Those are basically really long and really wide canoes. The first thought we would have would it would be a keel boat. Too early for keel boats. So from St. Louis to New Orleans today, it's just under 1,300 river miles. But we know that the river drastically changed in the New Madrid earthquakes, right, in 1811, 1812. So let's say roughly somewhere between 1,250 miles and 1,300 miles by canoe downriver to deliver that grain. And then they had to come home. So men, they joined in convoys. It was safer that way. They would be gone maybe 3 months a year to deliver the grain. Okay, next slide, please. So getting back then to where we are in the American Revolution, we know that the Declaration of Independence was signed in July of 1774. Spain wanted to remain neutral. Spain did not want to support the colonies. Why? They had colonies. If they supported a revolt by the British colonies, then would the Spanish colonies want to pick that up and revolt? But secretly, they wanted to aid the revolutionaries to embarrass England. Sounds like a chess game, doesn't it? All right, so politics. I will tell you, it's not on a slide, but I will tell you that years ago, one of the members of the Genealogical Society used church records and deeds and actually came up with a 1776 census of St. Louis that listed the main person in the household and then the spouse and all the children. So that's an interesting document to see how many people were here at the time. Okay, next, please. Okay, so in that year, 1776, there were about 2,100 inhabitants in Indiana, Illinois, and eastern Missouri. That's not too many people spread out through those 3 states. They were mostly French farmers and fur trappers, and they came from Canada, and you know where they settled. Vincennes, Indiana, Kaskaskia, Cahokia, St. Genevieve, St. Louis, and a few in St. Charles. They're all on the river. They're all on a river. St. Louis at that time had 120 houses and about 700 people. Not a very big village. Okay, next, please. Now, the authorities in Virginia were concerned that the British were supplying natives on the frontier. Okay, so George Rogers Clark then sent out his spies to find out, was that really true? Okay, next slide, please. So by December of the following year, Patrick Henry, who was the governor in Virginia, actually sent George Rogers Clark to capture Kaskaskia. Kaskaskia was on the river. If we could control Kaskaskia, we can keep the Mississippi River for French, all right? Keep them, we would keep it out of the hands of the British. All right, so so then we know that in 1778, France signed an allegiance with the revolutionaries to send French aid to help in the American Revolution. And we know the story about Lafitte, and we know the story about okay, that's on the Atlantic coast. And then there was a Spanish man named Fernando de Leyva whose wife had died, and he was already ill. And I think it was cancer, but I can't tell you which type. He was appointed governor of St. Louis, and he immediately came here to take over. De Leyva made sure that Clark had all the supplies he needed, again, secretly. Okay, please. Now, the French were still leery. The French didn't really want to get involved in this revolution because it was British. It was helping the Yankees on the East Coast. But Father Jabot actually met with George Rogers Clark, and Clark promised him that the French people could maintain their religious practices. And with that, Jabot said, okay, we will support you. We will work with you. Okay? And actually, this is Jabot's actual signature from one of the baptism records. He used to go back and forth across the river all the time. He was set up on the east side, but he'd come over to St. Genevieve. People go back and forth to celebrate weddings. It was a regular, no ferry, just by their own little boats. So in November of 1778, de Leyva requested 200 troops from Spain to protect the river and to protect St. Louis. And Spain said, we can't afford it. Turned him down cold. Next, please. So, George Rogers Clark, and we do have books in the library that will identify all of the men who served with him, if you think you have that in your past history. He took about 170 men and began walking to Fort Sackville, which is Vincennes. It was snowing, it was icy, they walked through swamps and forests and fields. And when they got there, next one please, in February 23rd, so from the 6th to the 23rd, they walked all that distance, 170 men. When they got there, they secured oath of allegiance from the inhabitants in Vincennes, and they sent word back to St. Louis that there is an attack being planned in St. Louis. So this is the end of February. And so messengers had to carry that information back. Spain declared war on Great Britain in 1779, and the British decided to take control of the Mississippi River. Why not? And the Spanish placed Frederick Haldimand in Canada as the governor. Now, he was a really interesting man. And together they planned to attack St. Louis and Cahokia simultaneously, same day. Next, please. Haldimand was called the hair buyer because he would buy scalps from the natives to encourage them to get bounty. And he began recruiting English traders. There weren't a lot of English traders. Most of them were French. The French people seemed to get along much better with the natives. They intermarried with a lot of native women. They raised their children. They just got along better. The British tended to be just a little bit more arrogant and treat the natives more as servants rather than co-workers, or did not share a lot with them. So there was a man named Emanuel Hesse, who was probably German, but then decided he would take charge, or he was appointed to take charge of this impending attack on St. Louis, and it was going to be his responsibility to make it come out. So they got various tribes, members from various tribes around the Great Lakes, and they promised them riches, spoils, etc., if they would join the British Army for this attack. Okay, next, please. Now, at the time, St. Genevieve was thought to be a more important location than St. Louis. It was a little bit bigger. Their production was a little bit higher. And the label really thought that St. Genevieve would be attacked first. So he has to defend two places 60 miles apart. St. Genevieve was actually founded initially because it was an access to the mines at Mine Lamont, which is in Madison County. It was a lead mine, so lead was high in demand. So in order to, and we're always afraid that the river is going to freeze over and limit your access between St. Genevieve and St. Louis. Next, please. So he had a road built. And this is a monument that's outside the courthouse in St. Genevieve that talks about the King's Highway. All right? So that road was established in order to move supplies and troops in the event one city or the other, one town or the other would be attacked. Okay. Now, there was a trader named Francois Vigo, and he let de Leyba know that in late March that this attack was planned. Okay. And so de Leyba began developing how are we going to protect, how are we going to defend St. Louis in the event of this attack. So we had an inexperienced militia force of 168 men, 15 regular army, and only 6 weeks to prepare for the attack. So what are we going to do? Next, please. There was a man named Louis Honoré de Tesson, not to be confused with Tesson Ferry. That was a different Tesson. But Louis was a St. Louis resident, but he had a trading post up on the Illinois River. And in mid-March, his wife overheard the plans to attack St. Louis. So she jumps in a canoe and comes down to warn de Leyba that the attack is imminent, that they are gathering forces. Now, at this time, they had 8 children. And Lewis and I think 3 of his oldest sons, they actually served in the defense of St. Louis. Next, please. In April, time is marching on. In April, Hesse's flotilla, his little recruits in canoes, are at the mouth of the Mississippi, which is 180 miles north of St. Louis. Coming down the river, they recruited another 250 Sac and Fox Indians. So their total force was about 1,200 men. And we had 168. Next, please. So on this day, April 17th, the priest in St. Louis, a priest, Bernard, blessed the first stone, and the villagers began to build a tower. The tower was going to be one of 3 towers connected by walls, fortifications. By mid-May, a single round tower had been built, about 30 feet in diameter and about 35 feet tall, so roughly the height of a 3-story building. It provided a great view of the surrounding fields. And it was, yes, ma'am.
Where is that at? Where is it at?
Where is it at? Right, and it would be, I'll show you in a minute. It's roughly now at the intersection of 4th and Walnut Streets downtown. But we'll see a map in a minute. And they named it Fort Charles in honor of Charles III of Spain. That's where the name Fort San Carlos comes from. So Fort San Carlos was really this tower. Wasn't quite a fort yet. Next, please. There was no time to construct a parapet. There was no time to add to this tower. They did have a floor built. Now, 18 miles north of St. Louis, at the confluence of the Missouri and the Mississippi River, there was the remnants of an old fortification called Fort Don Carlos, I think. So men went there and hauled these 5 cannon 18 miles down to St. Louis. So they had to pull 5 cannon 18 miles, and they made it. Because there was insufficient time to build more towers, DeLeyba asked the townspeople to dig more than a mile of trenches around the perimeter of St. Louis, and we'll see a map in a minute. And in front of the trench, they piled trees and stubs and anything to give them a little more protection. And you kind of saw that in the very opening slide a little bit in that drawing. Next, please. May 8th. May 8th. Word came that the approaching enemy was within 80 leagues, 240 miles of St. Louis. The force was said to consist of 300 Englishmen and 900 savages. Excuse the word savages. That came out of the book, history book. So DeLeyba then called in every able-bodied man within 20 leagues of St. Louis. And an able-bodied man was somebody between the ages of 15 and 50. So these would be the voyageurs, the traders, the hunters. Somehow he got word to them, and they started coming into St. Louis. Got 150 reinforcements in about 2-3 days, and they supposedly were all good shots. and they lodged and were fed by the inhabitants of St. Louis. That gives you an idea of what a pierogi would have looked like. Okay? Now, Deleba was really ill. In fact, he did not have long to live. And he began to dictate letters to St. Genevieve, saying, "It looks like it's going to be us and not you. Can you send some reinforcements?" So every able-bodied man in St. Genevieve signed into the militia and headed to St. Louis, bringing more armaments with them. They reached St. Louis by May 13th. Okay, next. May 23rd. Deleba receives word that the enemy force was within 60 miles of St. Louis, and the inhabitants, the farmers, continued with their spring planting. When it's time to get it in the ground, you get it in the ground. Next. The next day, the Indian party arrived just north of St. Louis. May 25th. Feast of Corpus Christi. The villagers attended Mass. It was a holiday for them. They went out to gather strawberries. The Indians reconnoitered the village, but they didn't understand the purpose of the tower. May 26th. Emmanuel Hesse sent Jean-Marie Ducharme and 300 Indians across the river to Cahokia. They were going to be attacked simultaneously. Next, please. May 26th. The attack on St. Louis came about 1 o'clock in the afternoon while the villagers were out in the fields. So when we think about a homestead, a farm, we think about the farmhouse surrounded by their own fields. And maybe the next farmhouse was 200-300 yards away, maybe a mile away. But the French would have, and I've seen this in other countries too in Europe, the town is here and all the fields are outside. And French fields were all long and skinny, but they were side by side. So the inhabitants of St. Louis were all out in the fields when the attack came. Deleba was actually carried from his sickbed to the top of that tower so he could direct the action. The Indians and the British, now the British were kind of in the back of the group. They didn't lead the charge. But they believed that the village was unprotected. Somehow they didn't know how industrious, how determined these people were to protect their homes. But when the cannon on top of that tower exploded, it was mayhem. They finally realized that they were in trouble. So the Indian tactics was single-handed combat. They weren't really prepared for that cannon up there. The Sac and Fox were already hesitant about attacking, and they kind of gave up after one cannon volley. But the rest of them really decided that they were going to carry on with the attack. Remember, they had been promised all of the spoils of this attack. Next, please. 21 people were killed or captured outright, and the other people tried to reach the trenches. They were trying to get back inside the line to be protected. So here is the map I promised you. So you see St. Louis was 3 houses deep, 3 blocks deep, I should say. You see where the church is marked. That is where the old cathedral now stands. You see where the tower was. So you can kind of get your bearings. This is what it looks like today with the map, with the line superimposed on it. Okay. Basically, it's taken up with the arch grounds. Okay, next, please. So we have a couple stories about some of the people. Jean-Baptiste Riviere was sleeping in a friend's cabin, a little distance from the main village, and when the attack came, Cardinal, his friend, died trying to escape the Indians, and Riviere was captured and tied to a tree. He was taken to Chicago. Later, he escaped and came back. So the attackers approached, you saw that in the map, the attackers approached from the north in one force. So some of the people were cut off, some of the people were wounded. One man stumbled into a sinkhole where he died. His dog stayed with the body 3 days until they came to retrieve him. John Chancelier had his entire family out in the prairie picking strawberries. And he was with an American, which was kind of unusual. But the American was severely wounded. And 2 musket balls struck Chancelier. Now, muskets, if anybody has any experience, you can chime in here. Musket, the barrel of a musket is not rifled. It's smoothbore. So the projectile, the bullet, doesn't travel very far or with very much force. So while he was wounded, it broke his arm above the elbow, but he wasn't going to let that stop him. He got his family in the cart. One of his daughters was struck, let's see, it said on her forehead, but it just hit her and bounced back off. That's how weak the projectile was from that distance. Okay, he recovered the man's body, the man who had been killed, and they reached the gates, and the horses dropped dead, probably shot, and the rest of the family got into safety. So here's another interesting story. This lady, Josette, she was 54, and she was the wife of a trader. And she put on, when it started, she put on one of her husband's coats with a pistol in one hand and a knife in the other, and made her way to the upper gate where she joined the trenches. Her husband died in 1788, about 10 years later, and she founded the first school for girls west of the Mississippi and conducted classes in a log house until 1804. And she moved to St. Ferdinand, which we know is Florissant, and then she lived to be 95 years old. So she was granted bounty land in St. Louis for her efforts. Fascinating story. Julian Leroy is another person that we know about. He was listed as a prisoner taken by the attackers. The legend, which may or may not have truth to it, was that he was pursued by a native, and he turned and he fired point blank at the native, hit him in the jaw, felt he could not really kill another individual unless he was under attack, I guess, bound up the man's head, and the Indian was so grateful that the Indian led him back to safety. It's possible that Leroy was captured by the Sac-and-Fax. We know that his oldest son, who was in the 2nd Militia Company, died in 1792. So there were 2 militia companies in St. Louis. Now, his 30-year-old son-in-law, Francois Hebert, was in the field hunting, and in trying to escape to the woods, shot in the thigh, crawled about 3 miles to Shoto's Pond. You saw that on the map. And he began calling for help about dusk. But the townspeople thought it was a trick. And so they didn't go to find him until it was too late. So he died from the loss of blood, and then he was buried in his own land later. A short time after that, his wife gave birth to their daughter, who is the only child to survive in that family, survived to adulthood in that family. Okay? This is a photograph taken from the church ledger, where Father Bernard says that he buried the bodies of Charles Basset, Emile Guyon, the lad Calvé, and a Negro of Chancelier who had been massacred by the Indians. So, Indians were unsuccessful in drawing the defenders out into the open, the kind of warfare, the kind of attack they preferred. So they vented their frustration by burning the crops, by killing any animals that they could find. And then finally, they decided to retreat. They had enough of the cannon. So they broke ranks and headed home. So the attack really lasted only a few hours. We had about 100 casualties, including the people taken prisoner and the people wounded. The British reported only 4 casualties, but I'm sure that's a mistake. So the number of casualties might seem insignificant, but for a village of 700 people and only 120 homes, it was a significant loss to the people who lived here. On the other side of the river, this is Holy Family Church in Cahokia. It has been in existence, use, Sunday Mass for 300 years. This church, and you can go visit it. It's a great place to visit. This church withstood the 1811 and 1812 earthquakes. So scientists from all over the world come and visit this church to find out why. Well, partly because of the type of wood they used, and partly because it's not our image of a log cabin. French people did vertical and not horizontal logs. Outside the back door, you will see that the Daughters of the American Revolution posted that sign listing the defenders of Cahokia on the day that they were attacked. Actually, George Rogers Clark showed up in Cahokia to defend that site because it was not nearly as prepared for defense as St. Louis was. Okay? So the malicious defense of St. Louis prevented looting. It probably prevented a lot more death and destruction. But we didn't see it as a victory. We lost too much. We saw it that we barely escaped. We had to deal with significant loss of people, family members, and livestock. However, strategically, it did have a big impact. It kept the British from taking over the Mississippi River. Okay? If they had succeeded, if the British had succeeded, they would have had a strong claim to the Illinois country, and the peace treaty after the war would have significantly shown that. Okay? Fernando de Leyva died a month later. He had been very ill. And as much as he did, and as much of his own money that he contributed to the defense of St. Louis, he was still vilified later, like he didn't do enough. Francois Valley from St. Genevieve was given the title of a Don, a count, by the Spanish king. And this is where it happened. So downtown at the Hilton Hotel, there's a little corner where this plaque stands to announce that this is where the fort was established. Next slide, please. This is a 1920, I think 1924, is that right? Yes. 1924 painting of the attack on St. Louis. And this painting is in Jefferson City, the state capital. Can you pick out everything wrong with that painting? The Indians did not come out of a forest. They did not wear Western headgear. And St. Louis did not have fortification built around it. So while it is a dramatic painting, it kind of lessens the actual event, in my opinion. Okay? So, now any questions or comments? Yes, sir.
When the men took the boats down to New Orleans, they had to walk them back from New Orleans to St. Louis.
Most of the time they did.
Because there was no steamboat.
No.
It was 1,000 miles downriver, but they had to walk, probably had mules or something, but they had to walk back from New Orleans with those boats. So they had to walk on the shore of the Mississippi, pulling those back to St. Louis. And St. Louis didn't have any hardware, so if you needed hinges, you had to go down to New Orleans. Or doorknobs, we didn't have any of that.
Right.
So that's why they went down to New Orleans.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's amazing the things that they accomplished. Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, well, yes. Sure, I said I normally don't do this. I have a little bit longer presentation. I thought it might be too long. So I'm trying to think. I've got a slide in the original on the difference between the French law and English law. We talked about that. I also have slides that list the people in this affair who have descendants who are members of the Daughters of the American Revolution. That slide's in there. But I will be happy to send the slides to Liz and she can send them out to you. All the information that I posted has come from about 30 different resources that you can look up in the library. Okay? Anybody else? Oh, okay. Thank you. Anybody?
What does stlgs.org?
Okay, St. Louis Genealogical Society. This is my email address. If you have additional questions for me, you can write to me at the office. I'm the librarian there. Okay. Which library? St. Louis Genealogical Society Library. It's in Maplewood. Mm-hmm. Okay.
And correct me if I'm wrong, if you want to find out more about some of your ancestors, the Genealogical Society can help you. Is that a true statement?
Yes, that is.
Okay.
Because a number of the earliest settlers belong to what we call first families, and their information is there. I'm also a genealogist by avocation, and I can help you connect to some of them. Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Judy. That was fabulous.
Okay. I'll get... Okay.
So, lunch is downstairs. You've got the elevator, or if you need to get some more steps in, at the end of the hall is the stairwell. So thank you all for coming.
Not a race.
We got footwear on Sean's and all this, because it's cold out.
Although who gets there first gets the most.
Where'd you see that for their shoes?
Just on digital, I can read it on my phone.
Okay, I'll do that.
There's so much here. My first time. I thought we were going to get it. You said, I get all that.
Which day is this?
Mine,
Oh, yes, I know.
Did I have it then?
Yeah, I get it here, yeah.
I just want to make them. Which one?
You know, I'm trying to get
Civil
it.
I think it was
Printing it to her, put mailing it out, do it on your computer. Please, there's a very few things I know about my computer, and email is one of them.
Okay, well, good.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you, that was very much.
Good, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you, Judy. And downstairs.
We were here for about an hour yesterday.
my memory.